thank you to those joining us today from all kinds of different time zones. We appreciate your interest, and on behalf of CriticalArc and the consulting team and those of our panelists here, welcome to our discussion. Really, this is something that it's timely for most of us probably dealing with the heat, but this is all about checking that engine light and trying to understand if our institutions of higher education, senior executive leadership, understand what those indicators are. Are they looking? And if they are flashing and going off, who's the mechanic that they're taking it to? What is it that they're going to do to invest possibly in the resources to make sure that not just compliance, but the safety and security, the climate and culture of a campus community is actually protected? So please join us today as we have this discussion, but to be more like a podcast and an opportunity for us to really exchange ideas. This is something that we could probably talk about for a couple hours. And through this next hour, we'll go through some introductions. We'll frame some of the topics. We'll have our panelists speak. And through that back and forth, we'll also invite you to use the chat. We have a Q&A box that you can send your questions, maybe some insights, and we'll collect those for the final 10 or 15 minutes of this webinar and make sure that we ask our panelists the questions and see if we can get you some answers or maybe even some better questions that we can continue to work on. We will compile this and look forward to sharing a white paper that takes this transcript and shares resources and information. So there's just as much in these conversations that we can learn from those of you who have joined and what you share in these side conversations. So please, let's make this as dynamic as possible. Take the opportunity in this fellowship for all those that are here. We are here for one mission. It's because we understand the spirit and the mission of the Jean Clery Act. And most importantly, it's how can we really raise up the dialogue and the understanding of our institutions. That's why we're going to talk about administrative capability. And we'll go over that list and some of the findings really from the Department of Education's reviews and those findings, the top 10. We'll use some of those to elicit some insights and subject matter expertise. So really, there's Clery as an early warning system and upstream risk management. And the panelists who we bring here today, of course, Kathy Hargis, who's Associate Vice President of Risk Management at Lipscomb University in Nashville, Tennessee. Also past president of IRMIA, which is the Risk Managers Association. We have Gabe Gates, Associate Vice President for Clery Compliance and Youth Protection at the University of Southern California. And we have my distinguished colleague here at CriticalArc, Mr. Jim Moore, recently retired from the U.S. Department of Education after what I'm sure seems like a couple lifetimes of service to the public, but really to campus communities and making sure that the Clery Act was dynamic and continued to evolve with the challenges that our own society has, but also the expectation of consumers of education and the stakeholders in those communities. So with that, I'll just also leave everyone with, we do have one little teaser. If you make it to the end of this hour-long session, it's even less than an hour, Gabe shared some interesting information this morning that we're still talking about, even in prep. And I think it would be an interesting Clery Act development, policy related, that we'll talk about at the very end, that probably would be helpful in understanding maybe some aspects that are coming down the pike for us to be aware of for our institutions and our work in this field. So with that, really, let's move to our panel, and let's start with each of our panelists really just framing an aspect of administrative capability. So I'm going to just read through the 10 quickly, just so we don't want to do death by PowerPoint. But if there's an item here that our panelists pick, one of those numbers to have a relatable insight or story to tell that can help our audience understand what administrative capability even means, then that's how we'll start to digress and share, but I'll start with that top 10 list. And we'll share this as well. I admit I just tried to paste it into chat, and Zoom doesn't like too many items. I'll work on that as our panelists are speaking. But when you look at the top 10 US Department of Education findings and the common administrative capability failures, we have failure to produce accurate and complete annual security report information, missing or incomplete info. There's failure to actively distribute the annual security report in accordance with federal regulations. It's 2. Number 3, failure. We have to come up with another word apparently for failure to compile, classify, and disclose accurate and complete crime statistics. Now, the majority of those violations, by the way, are due to discrepancies with the CSS DACT, the government's cutting tool and data set, not matching what's published in the ASFSR. Number 4 is impaired administrative capability. We're all here to talk about that, obviously, but repeat violations, failure to take remedial action, and that's a cumulative effect you'll hear us talking about. Number 5, failure to produce or maintain an accurate and complete daily crime log. 6 is failure to issue timely warnings, emergency notifications, or complying with emergency evacuations and response requirements. I know none of this is new probably to those who are on this webinar. Once again, these are the top 10 findings that are derived from the final program review determinations from Department of Education's reports. We have number 7 is failure to comply with Section 304 requirements of the Violence Against Women Act, and failure to identify, number 8, failure to identify and classify Clery geography in accordance with federal regulations. Who hasn't thought about that at night? And then number 9, failure to comply with record retention requirements or produce accurate and complete records to the secretary. We'll put some links related to that in chat as well. And number 10, failure to comply with Drug-Free Schools and Communities Act. So we'll start sharing some information in the chat. And before we do that, please feel free to share your role in the chat so we have an understanding of the audience here. Clery compliance coordinator, nursing or health center, res life, police department, public safety, executive vice president, whatever role, feel free to share that. And if you'd like your institution as well, so we know our audience and we can begin to connect with each other. So with that, Kathy, I'll turn to you in our virtual space here, and just wondering what resonates with you when we talk about administrative capability, and at your level in the president's cabinet, some indicators are going off, right? Mm-hmm. What is it that you can add to context for us, understanding how in your role you perceive those indicators, what they mean?
Sure. Thanks, Jonathan. I think for me, when I've read the list, all very important things and all things that we need to be thinking about. But I will say this number 4 was the one that really jumped out at me, kind of in my role here and thinking about this from maybe a little bit of a different lens. So I think this probably goes to the root cause, I would say, of a lot of the other risk or the other things that are on that list beyond just clearing and security risk. Unfortunately, we all find this, I think, in our roles and what we do, that, there's always meaningful conversations that occur after a report like this comes out, or after there's something that happens at your institution, when there's an incident, a crisis, a failure, whatever you want to say. There's always great conversations. And as I've always been taught, you never want to pass over a good crisis, because that's when action takes place and that's when things happen. So you don't want to wait too long after those things. But, I think for me, what I would like to talk about today is, how do we shift the conversation around a lot of these things from more reactive to proactive? And that sounds simple. And we all say, I know, we say this all the time, we're going to be more proactive than reactive, but in reality, the reality part is getting there sometimes is a little bit more challenging than what we'd like to admit sometimes. So I would say from my perspective in risk management, that, when I look at like the overall institutional risk, like from a high level, 50,000 foot level and from a broad level, like institutional wide. There's just so many risks out there, particularly now. I think now more than ever. I'm just gonna say I've been in my institution 20 years. I have never seen it quite like it is now. I've never seen the multitude of risks that are hitting the institution, that are hitting really the top level of the institution and what they have to deal with. And they're in all the different categories of operational, financial, legal, compliance, strategic, reputational risk. They're all fall in one of those buckets. But, with the things like the funding cuts, enrollment concerns, the demographic cliff, the big, beautiful bill, so many other things that, administration is really having to juggle and manage. What I'm seeing is prioritizing which risks are critical. They're all important, but which are critical and which are time sensitive. And so um, finding a way to do that. I mean, we have, you know, I'm a big proponent, as you know, of enterprise risk management, which is something that I think is so helpful in really helping upper administration to be able to look through the multitude of risks that are out there that are hitting them and that everybody needs resources for. And really finding a way then to help them identify which ones are more critical and time sensitive, making those more of a priority. So, it's an opportunity to have a different type of conversation with those at the C-suite level. And by approaching, I think, these things this way, it also helps them when it comes to allocating resources, which are all kind of are diminishing, I would say, in some
Right.
regards. So it's just a great way to help think about things in a different way, elevate the conversation to a higher level, getting administration's attention. Sometimes, like with Clery, they all know what Clery is. They don't know in the weeds, though, some of the things that are probably on this top 10 list.
Right.
But helping them is a key.
And so that's interesting, the proactive and some of the empowering aspects, right? It's not just running and saying we're going to get fined or the sky is falling.
Right.
So I find that interesting. And Gabe, does that give you some thought as well about, not just that list that we went over, but maybe any particular aspect that strikes you as something we can learn from, and not just saying here's a reactive aspect of Clery, but hey, here's a way it could actually be used to empower some proactive features.
Yeah, and maybe to just I'm gonna roll off Kathy for a minute because you triggered a few things, but this idea of sort of shifting our language as Clery professionals and sort of elevating, and how do we talk to senior leadership to address or identify if there are those issues in administrative capability? Because honestly, I see a lot of coordinators on here, and anytime a report comes out and you see more often now administrative capability, it's chilling, right? Is it essentially a low or lack of confidence in leadership? That language should get everyone's attention. And sometimes we're almost trying to help our leaders help themselves, right? And whenever I think of administrative capability and sort of more broadly, Kathy, as you was talking about with risk, Clery comes with very high inherent risk, right? You can drop the ball very easily. There are big implications if you do. Our work is to take that inherent risk, develop a strong program, and what is left is the residual risk, right? And so the concept of getting leadership engaged is really interesting. I hopefully have a few tips. But I did have a leader ask me one time, like, how would I even know if we are practicing administrative capability, right? Like, you expect that to mean that they're dedicating some resources, that there's some engagement with leadership. But I built Clery programs at a few large institutions, and then I've worked sort of as a consultant helping folks. And one of the ways that we as practitioners often measure our Clery program is we go through the compliance checklist or the handbook and we're comparing. And that's an effective way to do it sort of in the weeds. But when we're thinking more broadly, I would just challenge you to think maybe from a different lens. And whenever I build a program or evaluate a program, I really start with two questions, and it tells me all I need to know about the health of the program. So the first question would be, if I'm talking to the Clery practitioner, can you describe your sort of your relationship with key personnel across the university? How are you working with them? What's that cadence look like? How are you sharing information? And that will tell you a whole lot about if senior leadership is bought in or not, in my opinion, right? Um, because that's sort of the first way I can assess it objectively. Um, Ways that we can do it, it may be a little easier, but it's less subjective. If I go in and I say, is this a good program? You could start by asking the Clery coordinator, do you have a strong program? They're probably going to say yes, but right. That's typically, we can go in and maybe assume the program is strong because Ed has not showed up and you have not received a report, right? That's sort of another option. And the third would be maybe to do your own internal research, do what I just said, compare the regs with what you're doing. But this first question of just give me the outline of what the relationship looks like. And if the answer is, well, I don't really work all that closely with the Title IX coordinator, but they provide statistics to me monthly or annually. Um, Maybe we don't really share information at all. They give me statistical numbers to include in the annual security report. We've heard, I've gotten the response a lot of like, listen, that office, they're over at the hospital. They don't care. They don't know about Clery. They don't care about it. Um, and then maybe it's like, well, we give them a 30-minute online CSA training like everyone else. So those responses are all sort of the check engine lights for me. And that's sort of what triggers that. And so
I like
that,
that.
yeah. So that layout of just the first of like understanding the relationships at the university. The second thing I do to assess that sort of administrative capability and what I suggest that you may try is when we evaluate our Clery program based on the seven elements of a effective compliance program. And that's something that a lot of ERM folks and like chief compliance officers look at. But oftentimes when we get to Clery, we kind of lose that bigger structure. We're so focused on just the requirements, right? And so, there are seven standards there. It's published by the U.S. sentencing guidelines of assessing a compliance program for strengths. And I'll read them off really quick, but I won't go into them. But it's essentially standards of conduct, policies and procedures, compliance officer and committee, which I think a lot of us have gotten to that point now, communication and education, internal monitoring and auditing, reporting and investigation,
Mhm.
enforcement and discipline, and then response and prevention. So I only say that because it's a really great tool. So if you're looking, whether you're looking at your program as a whole or individual pieces of your program, which maybe I could talk about like the crime log here in a little bit, you can put this assessment over it. And this is a way to report out to your senior leadership in language that they understand, right? And it's less about the technicalities of Clery, and it's much more about the facts of here's where we're really strong, here's areas where we can improve. And it takes sort of that I hate to say emotional element out of it, but it sort of does, right? And it just is what
Yeah.
it is.
Those of you who know me, I like to quote Fisher and Ury in Getting the Yes. They talk about independent, objective data that no one's going to argue over, a common ground. And to that point, and I see the distinguished Mr. Webster from Texas with the question I was going to ask as well. Is there a chance, Gabe, that you could drop a link in or the title of those seven metrics? I know I have that PDF somewhere in my digital library, but I think some people would be interested in that's some really helpful advice and reminder.
Yeah.
And yet
Do we have a way to just distribute it to everyone after? It's going to be hard for
we
me to
will.
now,
And,
but
and actually, I see we've had some problems cutting and pasting the list, and I didn't want a PowerPoint heavy. So we don't have the top 10 in front of us to look at. We're going to say have all this in a document afterwards that we share with everyone. Plus, there'll be recordings, and we will take what's being said and put into a white paper to distribute as well. So we will share this information as soon as possible with a quick turnaround. So thank you, Gabe, for bringing that up, and we'll capture that info and distribute it. We give a chance for Jim to weigh in, but I don't want to forget that daily crime log aspect that you mentioned. That interests me very much. Jim, any thoughts on what's just been discussed, or out of that top 10? And once again, it's not about knowing the top 10, but aspects here that we can share that could be really helpful for the purposes of this topic.
Sure. So first of all, I really like what Kathy and Gabe shared there. I think those are extremely key points if we're going to actually get at higher level compliance, right? So I'm going to point out a couple. Well, one on the list and one that conspicuously is not. I don't know if anybody noticed which one got left off the list on purpose because of the way we counted the violations. This list is something that I worked on with folks at the department, and it depends on how you count the violations and what categories you put violations in. So CSAs aren't on this list intentionally. I wanted to see if anyone would notice. I think it's extremely important and a direct indicator of a school's administrative capability in the Clery context to be able to identify its network of mandatory reporters. Now, the effect that it has is that it tends to cause you to have violations in other areas that are on the list, right? It goes to the accuracy and completeness of the school's crime statistics. If incidents that are reported aren't making it into the Clery world for a school, then we won't have timely warnings and emergency notifications. It's not going to get on the log. The Clery geography won't matter very much. But the real problems there are that people who need help, say victims of sexual violence who are reporting crimes covered by the VAWA requirements, which are on the list, or with the obvious dotted line to Title IX or Title VI or hate crimes, all of these people who need help, right? Because we spend all of this time curating this data, the whole use it for good. I have actually been very encouraged by the fact that a lot of student groups who have gotten interested in Clery data on their particular campuses, I can think of 2 or 3 schools where student groups or student journalists have written articles just within the past couple of months saying, okay, now that we have all of this information, what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do to actually make the campus safer? What are we going to do to make sure that people who are having mental health crises get assistance? Great that we know the numbers. Now, what are we going to do? And of course, schools should be taking those steps because that too is an indicator of administrative capability. Remembering that administrative capability goes beyond any singular regulatory requirement. It is actually about an environment of compliance, which goes directly to the points that our friends were just making, right? We at CriticalArc have been emphasizing the notion of enterprise risk management. A lot of schools are quite good at engaging in these discrete tasks that have some kind of safety related purpose, right? They're quite good at various kinds of operational steps. What they're not as good at typically is actually creating a safety environment that works, right? A compliance environment that works. One of the things that I love about the ethics and compliance program at USC is that they have integrated compliance into operations. They don't merely wait for compliance folks on the internal side to come and poke in and take at the Clery office or at any other office on the campus. Instead, they've integrated those functions. That's perhaps the highest level of enterprise risk management and the highest level of administrative capability. Administrative capability is really the requirement that shapes everything under the Title IV regulations. It is the most serious finding that the Department of Ed can make against a school. By definition, if a school is deemed to have administrative impairments, of the serious nature that they end up in a report in the first place, it means that that institution lacks the ability or willingness to properly administer the Title IV programs and therefore should not be in them. Now, the department is usually not going to kick an institution out for that reason. It'd be a little odd to say to protect them, including in their role as not only as students, but as consumers and as citizens. We're going to close down their school and make them go someplace else. That wouldn't really make much sense, but it does put a bullseye on the institution and really requires the department to take very demonstrable actions and for the institution to take demonstrable steps toward getting into compliance, sometimes for the first time. The only thing I'll add for now is that this didn't always happen. This was not always the case. The very first case where the Department of Education said that impaired administrative capability applied to the Clery Act was in 2004 in the Salem International University case. It would be a case worth looking at. Up until that time, the standards of administrative capability were mostly thought to apply just to the financial aid programs. And some of the language in there does sort of sound like accountant speak, right? We talk about checks and balances in an environment of internal controls. We talk about fiduciary responsibility. But those fiduciary responsibilities, the requirement to have written policies and procedures, the requirement to be able to produce information to the secretary upon request, are all very basic requirements for the campus crime and campus safety requirements, drug-free schools as well, all the way down to things like FERPA, which impact our work in this space, right? So we need to think of this holistically, not just in these component parts.
I really like the holistic aspect, Jim. And I did some quick research and put up the 2004 FPRD. Thank you for pointing that out. And recommend anyone also, if you hit any of those links, you could look at some other FPRDs and search and learn quite a bit from that site. But what I'd really, I'm wondering on that holistic aspect, Gabe, and then Kathy, if there's some other pieces from that top 10, like Gabe, you mentioned daily crime log, that you can help share maybe how we operationalize this using the Clery Act.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Yeah. So the one thing, if you would choose to do something like an analysis of the seven elements over your Clery program, and it's kind of like, what do you do with it then, right? So I've just offered, in my mind, as I think through it, there are sort of four kind of critical moments where this kind of information can be shared with your senior leadership of like, hey, we've done this. First of all, they're likely going to be impressed that you've kind of went outside the Clery lane to assess your program more holistically. But four real quick ones. One, obviously, the annual security report's coming up fairly soon. I know I and a lot of folks may do a quick presentation or summary to your senior leadership before the ASR goes out. And I know it can often be focused on the crime data and what's gone up, what's gone down. But this is a really good way, especially if you have the opportunity for a quick PowerPoint in front of those groups, to add a slide or two on this sort of the maturity of your program and objectively identify any areas. I think the second, obviously, when there are big changes happening and, the hazing, stop hazing, all of those things. The third may be right after a training like this, that I was just at this webinar and they had mentioned some of these things. But the fourth, I kind of stumbled upon, and it is to get it in front of them every single day. And so I'd like to think this was done sort of a well thought out, planned operation, but something occurred, and all of a sudden we had senior leadership focused on sort of the incidents of the day, and it was really about a year and a half ago. So what we started doing is, in all of my other positions, the daily crime log was just a computerized report being generated. I'm not sure anyone looked at it much. Maybe put it on your website. The local newspapers may be picking up. We went to a different model where we actually send the daily crime log out to our senior leadership each morning. That's how we start our day. In that email, we highlight any cases that may get attention or are particularly egregious. We outline for any of the cases um, what campus partners we shared it with, right? And so we may have 4 cases that we had to send over to Title IX, 8 to go to student life, 1 to threat, all of those things, sort of outlining those procedures. And it did a few things, really. One, it just shows the coordination that is required and that is being operated on every single day by you all. But secondly, it kept Clery um, front of mind every single day, right? They were hearing and seeing Clery every single day. And then maybe finally, it served as a great reconciliation. So we were sort of, along with maybe making sure the classifications are correct, which is probably something you all are doing or your records manager. It was a way we found out that after we were all looking at this closely, there were some themes, maybe in report writing, where we were missing the boat on classifications, and we could address those themes through training. And again, that goes to the elements. We were able to each day, if we had 4 Clery crimes and a Clery geography, we were able to point to the 4 timely warning decision matrix we completed, which I think a lot of us are doing now, documenting why we did or did not issue an alert. And so while 24 hours later wouldn't be ideal, it is a way to make sure that those things are being done every single day. They're being considered. It's brought a lot of confidence, I think, in our public safety department, which I'm actually not in, but okay, you got all 4 of these today, and so it seems simple. And I know historically, again, I used to generate the daily crime log with no narrative or nothing else in it. I don't know that anyone read it. But this one change, it kind of addresses all of the elements that I just talked about, and it's a way to get Clery in daily vocabulary with senior leaders.
And That's some good advice. And if remember, there's also Q&A what we'll have at the end. So please, anyone submit your questions or comments, and we'll put that in order to answer. If we don't get to them all, that'll be part of the post webinar materials that we share. And really would appreciate if anyone has other ways that you're able to bring the Clery Act up. And remember, those related risk items institution-wide to leadership, put that in the chat, please. We're learning from you as well as participants. And Kathy, what insights do you have based on where we've been headed with this conversation now with indicators and institution-wide risk, and using Clery as a good way to galvanize maybe the administration and leadership?
Sure, Jonathan, thanks. And Gabe, kudos to you. I love what you had to say. And I think that is that's a great model, I think, for a lot of schools to consider. Keeping things front and center, other than just right before October, is a great thing. And anytime you have an opportunity, I think, to get in front of senior leadership to talk about these things, take advantage of that, because that is really important to keep that on their minds. One of the things I would encourage you to do, and this is coming from my lens as well, is, I have found so much, even more so lately, that all of the risks that we deal with are very interconnected. Meaning, they hit multiple departments, across our campuses. Clery is one. I mean, Clery could be one of them. And for me, what I'd like to think about, and this is a way that I have found resonates really, really big with senior administrators. I mean, there's a couple of things big risks that probably all schools are dealing with. It has to do with enrollment. Your enrollment, what's it look like, and your more your financials. So tying things together, like, the overall security program and Clery. I mean, Clery can be such a positive, open book, so to speak. You want to be very transparent, because transparency is going to build trust with, those people coming and the whole institution. But to think about how you tie even Clery and security into those other areas, such as enrollment. I mean, it definitely feeds into that. If your school's not very safe, I mean, it probably is going to maybe impact certain people from coming. But you have to almost say that. I mean, there is a moment where you have got to connect the dots, tie things like security and Clery and all the other things, there's multitude together with other types of risk to really make it very meaningful. And I would encourage everyone to kind of take those opportunities to do that. I have found that, you know, when you're looking at, like in our ERM program, we talk about things like that of, you know, the safety of our school is going to play into a lot of other areas. So, but how can you kind of, I think, bring that up in a very positive way is important. You have to think about, I mean, probably, Gabe, you've got an opportunity to do that in the way that you are rolling that out. So I think thinking creatively in those lines and how you
Yeah.
do that is important, as well as what you say.
It really reminds me, we've had conversations about positive key performance indicators for campus public safety and how the Clery Act relates to that. It's not about spin
Right.
and making things sound good that aren't, but actually there's a lot of what the Clery Act can help pull together in terms of better reflecting how not just the Department of Public Safety, but the entire institution supporting the vision, mission, and values. And Clery is one of those frameworks. It cuts across all those areas. Jim, would you like to, for this portion of the panelists sharing their thoughts about these indicators and administrative capability and the top 10, mysterious top 10 list everyone wants to see? Any thoughts to tie that together? And then we'll have some closing thoughts from our panelists and then Q&A.
Sure. Is what we're hearing from this group is reinforcement of the way we did it at the Department of Education, quite frankly, in terms of the approach taken. The whole point of the Clery Act is that it creates a roadmap for improved campus safety and crime prevention. It's not a twisted test just to see if you can find a way to comply. One of the points that I make all the time is that about 90% of compliance simply happens when you do the right things well. Okay, we say that all the time at the department. I always make the point I'll be taking the collective we, using the collective we probably for the next 5 years. Fortunately, I do it with the indulgence and even sometimes the support of the agency. But it is a key organizing principle because schools should be asking themselves, when we do these things, in addition to the mere compliance requirement, why are we doing them the way that we do them? What is it about this that's actually making people safer? There are a few pieces of the law, quite frankly, that you just have to do. And they aren't necessarily just going to do themselves or happen automatically by doing the right things well. That's why I say 90%. That last 10% can be a bit annoying. But most of the rest of the policies, procedures, practices, the programming that you have to put on, all exists for very real points. The history of the Clery Act is a history of expansion. It's expanded because it's had to deal with new problems. Congress is always looking at the next thing. I've been talking about for years, as you well know, that if schools didn't do something about hazing, Congress was going to do it for them. And now it has. And you might not like their solutions in some cases. The same is going to happen with mental health and suicide prevention. Behind that is the whole problem of deferred maintenance in higher education. What do all those things have in common? All have a direct line back to the concept of administrative capability and enterprise risk management. I'll leave folks with this from that standpoint. We were just talking to a campus leader about this just a little while ago. You should look at the very public-facing parts of your Clery program and ask, would this stand up to rigor? Would this stand up to review? If, God forbid, something happened on this campus whereby all of this, we're on the major network news or all of the major internet sites and social media, would your program stand up to review and scrutiny by the public, politicians, right? Your own stakeholders and community members, and quite frankly, the plaintiff's bar, right? We have had cases at the department, and we've dealt with people in our consulting capacity who have had the experience that very shortly after there is a major incident, that CNN is reading from their annual security report. It should be written as if that's likely to happen.
It,
And then it never does. That goes to the very core of administrative capability.
right. We've all probably been through SWOT analysis, but it's truly an example of like that headline exercise, right? That's something that, whether people like it or not, it's actually happened. And Jim, thanks for those thoughts. Well, for time's sake, I would like to have Kathy and then Gabe, maybe just share any closing thoughts with where this flow has been going, if there's anything to tie up. And then what I'd like to do is make sure we've got that little teaser, right? So we'll touch base with that right before getting to some of the Q&A. We have a couple good questions here. Some have been answered already, so we've cleared that from the queue. But let's go with Kathy, Gabe, and then we'll hit the teaser, Q&A, and we'll wrap up. So Kathy, any thoughts, closing thoughts?
Sure. I'll just give a couple here, and it's all been great conversation.
Good old me, Kathy.
I've enjoyed it myself. So, I would say a couple of things.
Still can't hear you. Oh, there we go. Got it.
I'll just make a couple of comments here. And it's all been great conversation. And I've learned a lot. But, when you're thinking about this, I would encourage everyone to really increase their collaboration across campus. Reduce that silo mentality. I think we all get so busy in our day-to-day that it's easy to do that. And you have to be intentional. I mean, I think you can't be increased collaboration without really being very intentional about it. I'm the risk and compliance officer here. So when I think about compliance, everybody has their own opinion of what that is, Clery included. You always hear, should it be the floor or the ceiling? I mean, you like to think about your compliance, we're doing what we have to do, but we want to go beyond that. We want to really say something. I encourage you to tell your story of what you're doing throughout the campus. If you have a newsletter, if you have whatever, tell that story. Try to get with your PR person, talk about what you're doing. The more you can do that, the more buy-in you're going to get. And again, and I think in the framework that we're in higher ed right now, where there's so much going on and so much competing for, what's on the front burner for our top administrators, you almost have to think that way, because good intentions, but things tend to fall off when there's so much competing. So that would be kind of my closing things. If you haven't reached out to your risk manager, if you have an ERM program, take them to coffee. We as risk managers, we would love to do that and have a conversation and think about how you can collaborate more, get that on that top risk list, and kind of go from there.
Yeah, that sounds good, Kathy. I mean, most of you on the call here would be considered my peers, right? We're doing the same work. And I'll just say, in the 12 years I've done this as a brand new coordinator at the bottom of the totem pole kind of a thing. And I've done basically the same kind of a job at an AVP level, reporting to the senior vice president. So it's much easier, right, this way. So, again, I want to just stress that you have to it's scary to share maybe the complete reality of your program, because everything's probably not perfect. It's not perfect in my program, right? And I was trying to give you some tools to bring that to light without sounding, again, personal, right? That you're blaming somebody. So the more you're able to do that and talk sort of enterprise risk language rather than Clery nuances that your leaders don't understand, I think it's going to be beneficial for you. When we talk about this, I always say to my team, problem finders are easy to find, right? Problem solvers are harder. And so whenever you are seeing some of these issues, I think the concept of not pointing the finger and saying they're not sharing information or we have these issues, bringing something to the table along with that has been very helpful in my mind. What we've been trying to do lately is think less about Clery and its lane over here and more about sort of integrating what we need for Clery in existing workflow and processes and systems where they're working well. It may be less pulling things out of student life or Title IX for the Clery specific lane and integrating what we need and the assessments we want into those kind of systems. Um, so that was it. I'm sure again that most of you have a Clery policy and probably a lot of you have a Clery committee at this point. The last nugget I'd leave you with is a few years back in our policy, we identified what we call the Clery Act Executive Oversight Group. So that's sort of a smaller group of the VPs or senior VPs. We report out to the ASR and some other policy decisions. But even if you're able to maybe get something like that going and you're meeting just quarterly to give the updates on your Clery program, that's really where some of any of these issues that you're having can be worked out, right? When you're bringing those leaders together. So I'm happy we have a policy on that and our executive oversight group and our interdisciplinary review team. Happy to share if you reach out to me.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm right where Gabe is, really, and I think it's a good place for us to transition to our questions. I will let everybody know that we're going to continue to have these kinds of events to try to bring important issues related to campus safety, crime prevention, student wellness, compliance to your field of vision. Some of those will be events like today. We will also be having some paid events coming up, including one on hazing. Is sometime in August and probably again in September. You're going to want to tune in for that. I think it will be some of the best Stop Campus Hazing Act training that's available anywhere. So be looking for that announcement as well. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thanks, Jim. And really, let's get to that last question right before Q&A, because I'm sure everyone's at the edge of their seats. But Gabe, you shared some information this morning just with the NIBRS definitions and that change and what that means. I know we had a brief conversation, but if you could maybe give that update so people know maybe something to keep an eye out or let their leadership know what might be coming down the pike.
Yeah, thanks. It's so fresh that I'm afraid to give much other than keep an eye on this. But this morning I did notice that the FBI released an updated NIBRS user manual, and it's dated June 23rd, 2025. But in there, I noticed that the definition of fondling is gone, and the term fondling is gone, and it has been replaced with sexual criminal contact. Um, and there are similarities to that definition. For example, there's still language about the touching for sexual purposes, right, or sexual gratification. The major change for me would be it no longer sort of limits it to touching of a private body part. And so I'm just calling this out because, I've had 4 hours with this, but it's something to keep an eye on. Jim, you may want to talk a little bit more about what that means for Clery purposes, but
Yeah, just quickly. Many of you may recall that when the Department for provisions of the Violence Against Women Act all the way back in 2014, we added additional statistics to the regulations, right? Now we put the VAWA definitions directly into the regulations. And of course, the rest of the definitions that apply to the Clery Act are in Appendix D to Subpart A, as it's known in the regulation. Here's the point. The point is that the definitions for Clery purposes do not change until the department changes them. Okay, so you'll remember, some of you, that some of the definitions under VAWA 2022 were slightly different than VAWA 2013. That did not change the Clery Act, and this will not either. The department will at some point provide instructions to folks to say we're going to change those definitions if they so choose. Until that time, you really don't have to do anything at all. But it is always very important to be aware, as Gabe says, when the NIBRS folks adjust any of the requirements, because you're going to have to harmonize these things eventually with what you're doing in other aspects of your overall compliance, including what you might do with your state UCR programs.
Thank you, Jim. It's getting late for all of us because I'm very slow at unmuting right now. So with that, we'll go to some of the Q&A, and thank you for those who stayed with us and submitted questions. If we don't get to yours, we will make sure they're answered in the follow-up materials, including the top 10. So one question we have here, Gabe, related to the daily emails about the crime log. Do you find that you were able to connect with parts of campus that you hadn't been able to engage with before? Or did anyone reach out to you to get added to that distribution list? Was it all one way, or was it a two-way street?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Each day we have 4 or 5 people commenting on the log, right? The senior VP for administration may want a little bit more detail on an incident that looks, again, particularly egregious or noteworthy. It's a really good way of our senior VP for student affairs indicating it. You actually haven't seen that come through our Title IX system yet. That case you mentioned, we're going to go back and reconcile. And it does seem like a big task. I mean, we have just under 300,000 CAD events a year. So our log's probably as big as any's. And that's why, making those sort of summary points does generate conversation rather than just shipping this giant log to them every day and expect them to read through it line by line.
Thank you. And the other question we have, I hope that answered the question there. Is there a main obstacle to extend collaborations in the questioner's experience related to campus security? Every institution does at least one thing better than everyone else, right? How do we all share that and overcome silo thinking for mutual benefit? Good question.
I mean, I'm happy to take this one too. I don't know, but so for sure, right? Like I think we all have our own challenges, right? For me, in a lot of the places I've worked, it's been the hospital side for institutions with academic hospitals. And what I found is typically it's not necessarily they don't care about Clery's, they don't know about it. They know that the Clery person sends some demand letters to them wanting information about some very sensitive stuff that they have, right? And that's about the extent. Where we made a ton of progress is when we meet with leaders in those harder areas. Every single time I start with the story of Gene Clery, right? And I just take that 2 minutes to start with the why. Why are we doing this? And people can connect to that. And it's less about, well, if you go to, the handbook or the regulation on page what, and reciting the requirement, it's more about let's understand what we're trying to do first and why we need information, for example, and build from there. It's gone an awful lot easier. And like, institutions where we thought they just didn't care or were difficult people to work with, they just really didn't understand the why. And that's been helpful.
Thanks for going to the why. It reminds me, Jim, what is it that you always say if you have a mute there about compliance? If you do what? You're compliant if you just do the right thing 90% of the time.
Oh, right. I think I said it earlier. 90% of compliance is about doing the right things well. Virtually every presentation I've ever made about the Clery Act, I start out talking about Gene Clery or some of the other cases that I've had to confront in my long career. And you make it about the people, not the paper. That's the way I often put it to the schools. This is about people, not paper.
Wonderful. Thank you. I think we're going to have a lot of one-liners that are able to come from this. If we just have one question in chat real quick with the 2 minutes remaining, and thank you everyone who remained to the end. Put our contact information there. Gabe and Kathy, if you want to put any contact information for yourself, please put that in the chat. We'll use the chat to inform our takeaways and resources as well. That last question, do you have weekly follow-ups with campus safety? Do you have daily or weekly follow-ups with campus safety? Kathy or Gabe, from your experience, how would you answer that question?
From my perspective, follow up with security on a weekly basis. Is that what you repeat that again?
Yeah, I believe that. I believe that's where the question is coming from. So senior leadership may be getting those type of oversight or the intel.
We have kind of a standing committee, and then, I chair the ERM committee, and security, our chief is part of that. So there is I would say, a constant kind of communication that we have on different things. I think it's important to continue those, to build on those and move forward. So yes, it's all about communication sometimes, and build those bridges in all different areas, and it will really pay off down the road.
That's what it's all about. Thank you, Kathy. That's perfect words of wisdom for us to finish on. Please continue the conversation with us. We want to continue to build some fellowship and community, making sure that there's a lot we can still do to empower how our institutions protect our campus community. So thank you, and we will be in touch shortly with all the information we promised. Take care, everyone. Thank you, panelists.